was a son. He was devoured by earth. There was a God. They call him the Father. And there was a means to make a valley with grace out of this hole that I've dug for me. He made a valley of grace where things would change, and maybe they'd take up the cross high again. The valley of grace was never the same.
Well, welcome to the Valley of Grace podcast. And today I have Chris Archuleta here. Welcome.
Hello.
All right, Chris, will you please tell the audience, give them a little bit of your story or a lot of it, however you want to do it.
Yeah. So I was, I guess I usually start off this way, and I had a drug problem growing up. I was drugged to church on Sunday. I was drugged to church on Wednesday. I was drugged to Bible studies. I grew up basically a Christian and was drugged everywhere, to the point where, like, my parents lived a totally different life before I was born, in the gang life and stuff like that. And then when I was born, maybe a year into it, they both got saved, and then they both started going to church. So my older siblings, brother and sister, they grew up slightly different to that age. But for me, I grew up just knowing my family went to church, like we're Christians, and that's all we did. So in the third grade, friends were asking, like, well, what are you? And I said, I'm a Christian. And they're like, no, that's your religion. What ethnicity are you? And I didn't even know I was Hispanic. Like that's how in the church I grew up. So I grew up in that. My dad became a pastor while I was in middle school
Okay.
and started pastoring his own church. But we always kind of grew up. It almost felt like we were PKs anyways for how much my dad did in church, and just the way he made us study the Bible and read it. And then I kind of dealt with some things, but fell into my own relationship with God in my 20s, and soon became the middle school pastor at a church, and then went to go pastor to help my brother at his church. um and
Church.
What was that? I'm sorry.
You said your brother started a church?
Yeah, so my brother was a pastor also in the high school ministry when I was growing up, and then he went to go help my dad as his associate, and then he went to go start or take over a church within the conference they're a part of, and I went to go help him. So I went with him, and we did that for probably 10 to 12 years. And in that time frame, because of just since the moment I think I was 16, I became a trustee at the church I was growing up. I was just doing, I was serving and serving and serving. There was a point in my life that it just became such a performance thing and such a routine thing. And I fell into that trap of performance. And because I knew enough, or I knew more than the people around me or my age, as far as the Bible can, growing up, where we were like, my dad was like, here's the commentary, read this thing.
Okay.
I had pretty good knowledge to me. So I knew more. I relied on that. And a lot of times I like to tell people what I fell into was the David thing, where, David was supposed to be going out to battle.
Okay.
But instead he was up on top of the mountain or on top of his castle and just looking around all like, yeah, I'm just David the king, and I get to relax finally, right after all the years of fighting and wandering. And then he sees Bathsheba and has his epic fall. Well, for me, it wasn't so much a Bathsheba thing, but it was rested on what I knew.
Okay.
And because of that, it caused fatigue and burnout to kick in, to the point where my marriage started to struggle, the ministry started to struggle, and me as a person, I just completely just kind of was done.
Wow.
And so there was this very difficult point in my life then after that where I stepped out of ministry, and we were still going to church as a family, but my marriage wasn't right. And
Mm.
it just I was at a point of giving up. I had done so much. And I think I fall into the category of, if you look at the prodigal son story,
Right.
everyone focuses on the prodigal son, right?
They
And
do.
everyone's like, yeah, that's the life. But for me, I went into the older brother routine, who, when the father is like, "Hey, your brother's back, let's celebrate."
Mhm.
The older brother was, he said, he became angry and refused to go in. So the father went out to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all the years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. You never gave me a young goat or so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who has squandered all your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf." And then the father says, "You are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we celebrate today because your brother came back home. He was dead and now he's alive." So I fell into that category of the older brother in the prodigal son story, where I think I allowed myself to get lazy. So my spiritual walk wasn't right. And then that caused me to get burned out when I wasn't seeing God do things in my personal life or in my ministry the way I thought he should. And I almost had that same kind of angry, like, "Well, God, I've been serving you my whole life. Like, you've never once even done anything for me." And it wasn't until many years, or a few years, maybe like a year or two in this slump, that God kind of hit me through some other personal tragedies in my own life with the, "Yeah, I've never given you maybe what you wanted, but you got the thing I need." And that's what he says to the older son is, "Son, I'm always with you."
You
And
sure?
that really, yeah, that really kind of just changed the whole dynamic of everything. But there was definitely a point in my life where I got myself burnt out pretty bad in ministry and what I was doing. Because again, I think my biggest struggle with it was it became about performance and not so much about love.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, if I could just do this and do that and look like this and that for the Lord, that type of thing. Hmm. So what do you know how when we have things that happen in our life, whether they're diseases or whatever the case may be, as far as the stress causing coming on, because usually when we have stress that hits, it's not like it's all of a sudden. We've been seeing signs like all along, and we kind of just like, yeah, yeah, something's going on, but you just kind of ignore it. You know what I mean? What do you think were some of those signs with you as far as burnout?
So for myself, and I mentioned a few, but let me get like hone into them
Mhm.
specifically. So the first one was self-reliance. I trusted myself more than God. I leaned on the things that I already knew. I relied on myself and my own knowledge and all that stuff. And the one thing I think out of all of this, God really chipped at me was that knowledge is nothing without love. So I had tons of knowledge, but I just wasn't a loving person. And
Mhm.
and I trusted myself so much more than I trusted God. I would tell people like, trust in God, He's got your back. But when it came to my own personal life, I was trusting myself so much more that I would solve the problem. I was the problem solver, and it was up to me to take care of the situations. And I think that became the thing where I tried to solve my own problems instead of doing what I had been preaching, was
Right.
rely on God. He's got your back. He'll get you through this thing.
Okay.
And it was just myself. When my marriage started going bad, I tried to fix it myself, and I just made it worse.
Yeah.
When my spiritual life was going bad or my ministry was going bad, I worked in the flesh and
Mm.
not the spirit. And so it was just that self-reliance was the first thing. And the second thing was lack of self-care. um, I didn't eat right during that time. I didn't keep
Mhm.
myself active the right way. If these are the physical things. I didn't rest right, and I was burning that midnight oil, where I would work really late and then wake up really early, and I wasn't just getting enough sleep. And and then spiritually, I wasn't talking to God. I
Okay.
wasn't in my word. And so that lack of self-care, because I was relying on myself, those two kind of go hand in hand. And I was just really caught up in that more than anything else. And then the last one, like I kind of mentioned already, is I was just in performance. I was in performance mode, and I was caught in that trap. It's like that hamster wheel of like I'm
Yeah.
moving and moving and moving, but I'm going nowhere.
Nothing
And,
was
right, like, you could be, it's the hamster. I'm running, or a treadmill. I hate working out on a treadmill, because on a treadmill you're basically going nowhere.
true.
um I already don't like running, so I don't want to run where I'm not going anywhere. So I go outside and run because I want to see distance. I want to see like accomplishment.
Hmm.
Um, but then really what the performance was about, it was about this main thing. My performance was about my guilt. It was about my guilt, and I was trying to earn God's love or keep God's love. And it was about my guilt because I knew the other things I just wasn't right. Like I was living in hypocrisy for a lot of it. And I read this book, and in there it says this, and this is after I have, like, I read it in the last year or so, and it's been after like my relationship with God's gotten so much better. But it said, what if we fail, and what if we sin? We will do both, and God knows that. He knows humans pretty well. He
Right.
knows who we are, but he already loved us before we had the slightest interest in doing anything to love him back. He loved us when we were his enemies, and that's from Romans 5:8.
Hmm.
God loved us before we were in his family. Why would he love us less or stop loving us now that we were in his family? When we sin and fail, and this is the part that really registered with me for afterwards, when we sin and fail, he forgives us. He wants us to believe that and get back to imitating Jesus. And that was the key ingredient I was missing, is that I felt that if I sinned or if I did something wrong, then I had to work my way back up that ladder. So I really got caught in that idea about performance in my own life. So for me, when I look at what led me to that situation, it was mainly those three things. I was just so arrogant and prideful, and it became about my relationship with God. Not didn't wasn't about finding Him. It was about me and what God can do for me. And it's interesting. I kind of say it this way. I feel like I was serving a false God for years,
Okay.
for probably a big part of my life, because we can do that. We can create God into a false God, even though we think we do the right thing. I kind of look at Paul in his life, where when he was Saul, he really thought he was doing what God wanted him to do.
He
He
sure did.
thought he was, yeah, he thought he was doing God's will. And it wasn't until God had removed the scale of from his eyes, from the blindness, and what I think the blindness was the blindness to really see who God was. And when he removed those scales, and it wasn't until he saw who God was, that his whole life changed.
Mm.
And that's kind of the same thing that happened to me, was that the moment I saw who God was, I just was like, what was I doing? I'm such a dummy.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, once our eyes are open, then you just, yeah, like you said, you just, so shocked. And I've had that to happen myself. And I know even my therapist at one point had mentioned to me to be careful, because it's like once the blinders came off to patterns I noticed in my own life of disappointment and disillusionment and discontentment, unmet expectations, and then you got the despair along with it. I call them the big D's. So when all of the big D's happen, um, and like I had that come to Jesus moment about the patterns that went on with it, then I was hard on myself, and she was like, well, be careful, because you do want to take responsibility. And now that you see the patterns, you got a different perspective. You can see, how to work on that area, but then you don't want to go so far over where she said, because you're like borderline on self-blame now. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because I told her, I was just like, wow, then you see, it's like, oh, I was just so broken. And yes, we were so broken, but then it's like, my next thing was like starting to self-judge and self-blame. And she had to point that out to me, that
Yeah, I read an interesting book. It's called The Cure. I want to believe it's by an author named John Lynch. And my pastor gave this to me, and he's been a wonderful man who's helped reshape, or not reshape, but pick me back up. I was a very broken individual after you leave to go, and this is kind of my story in a nutshell. I leave to go and especially the church I was at, I leave to go to help my brother, but I also leave with the intent, and here's where my psychology was really wrong. I left with the intent to show people that I can make a church grow and be big. And I went out there to prove people wrong on what they said of me. And when all of that, when I like those, you're saying those unmet expectations that but God never promised to say, like, Chris, you're gonna pastor and over like thousands of people. He just said, shepherd my sheep. He gave me a simple instruction, and I blew it up into this bigger thing because my ego made me do it. The Nebuchadnezzar in me was like, look at all I've done type thing. And I was very successful as a middle school pastor. It was a ministry that went from 15 to 70 middle school kids. So that ego just built and built and built. And I thought I could duplicate that. And when that started to fail, then I was a failure. And because I was a failure here, then I was a failure in my marriage, and I was a failure in this thing. So I was definitely at a point that the best illustration I could give to people about my brokenness was uh, I was in the fetal position, and the devil and his homies of demons were just stomping on me. And I was still there, but I wasn't fighting back. I wasn't doing anything, and I was just letting it happen. And it wasn't until I kind of just bounced myself back up and said, hey, I've got to fight back or do something, that I would have been stuck there. So I was very broken. And
Yeah.
then we come back to the church where I left, and me and my wife, and I come in broken with my tail between my legs, and the pastor he just said, let me help you and carry you while you're a little defeated. So he gave me this book, and in this book, it talks about how sometimes we can see when we sin or fail or we make mistakes, we see God sitting at the other side of our garbage, like a big old bags of garbage piled up. And we see God on the other side of it. And he's looking at us like kind of like this, and like shaking his head and disappointed, like, how could you? How could you do that? And and really what the picture is, and the author showed us, is that God is right, sees our garbage, but he's not on the other side of it. He's right there next to us, holding us and
Mhm.
loving us and saying, hey, it's okay. Now let's get back up and move forward in this relationship.
Right. That is so true. But once like we said, like you said, the scales fall off. I think first reaction is like, the self-judgment, the self-blame, and how could you have done that? You know what I mean? And we can go on and on and on, which is only gonna make us feel worse. Now that we've had our come to Jesus moment, so to speak, about being able to see what we couldn't see, which that is that's something, that's a whole nother level too. Once your eyes are open, you can't unsee what you see. But for years you can go around having certain seasonal patterns of behavior, not noticing it. And then once it comes out, it's just like, wow, and then you just kind of raw, because you got to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was asking about the signs that you saw, because I know some people, everybody's different when it comes to burnout. Some people say they just have the emotional exhaustion. Some people say they become very cynical, you know, and some people like
Mm-hmm.
where they are, like you said, it might be like where they're self-reliant. So it's like, when it comes to certain things, we all exhibit different behaviors, especially with the burnout.
Yeah, and I didn't even catch, and you brought it up. I didn't even catch the anger or the resentment.
Really?
So that was building in there too for myself, but I didn't catch that. I didn't notice it until way too late that was there.
Mhm.
The other ones took precedence because I think those are the big issues that I was struggling with. But um, those, I think the anger and the resentment led to my self-reliance, my lack of self-care and performance, because I was so angry that God wasn't doing what I wanted, that I was like, hey, if you're not going to do it, I'll just, the one thing that my parents have always said is I'm kind of like a bull. I'll just put my head and keep going. And
Mhm.
in that anger, I just did that. And so I just relied on myself. I said, if it's not going to get done, I'll carry it and I will force it to get done. But You know, the beauty of it all is that when I look back at it, um, I really thank God that nothing came of like no success in the worldly standard or what I wanted happened, because I would have failed. I would have failed miserably. I would have been that guy where they're like, here's another pastor of a giant church who's got to step down because of all the failures or the mistakes that he's made, because I just wasn't right.
I
And that's where, like, for me, brokenness is so important. And in my burnout and in that brokenness, um, you know, the world's kind of sees it as like broken and damaged things. They're no longer good for being used. But
Yeah.
God shows us that when something is broken and when it's damaged, that's the perfect time he can use it, because now he can mold it and he can start removing those pieces and get rid of those pieces of the world that we've added on to our own lives. And he can start adding himself. So it's such a hard thing, because I think as a non-Christian, when we talk about brokenness and God's got to break us, to the non-Christian, that sounds so mean. It sounds so like, how could God do that? How can a loving God do that? But because of his love, he breaks us so that we can become disciples, followers, imitators of his son Jesus. Oswald Chambers said this. He said, leave the broken, the irreversible past in God's hand, and step out into the invincible future with him. And I just really love that quote, because it's like, yeah, leave the broken, move forward with God, and move more to being like his son.
Amen. Oh my word, yes. So what would you say would be some of the tips that you would give someone uh, in ministry to help them to avoid being burned out?
So the first and the biggest one is rest, 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 rest. Uh, we burn ourselves out sometimes because we're just going, we're just doing, we're just I go and I go and I go, and I think it's the most important one, because there's many forms of rest. I rest physically, I rest myself because I'm exhausted. There's rest mentally. I've just got to shut it down. And then there's like spiritual rest, where I just kind of, it's not a laziness where I'm not reading my word or praying, but I'm just resting in my savior. I'm resting in him. It's almost kind of a, I would equate it to the term we kind of use in the church called quiet time.
Yes.
And in a yoga, they'll call it meditation.
Yes.
And for me, that's kind of the idea of that spiritual rest. It's just find yourself in a place not to fall asleep, but to just sit there and allow God to speak. And whether it's through words, music, or what have you, just get that alone time with him. But rest is so important. And I get this. Jesus took a nap in the middle of a storm.
Yes, he did.
Right. And I think people forget that part. They kind of go on to like Jesus calmed the storm. But Jesus was showing us something also in that moment, is that you can rest in your chaos, in the craziness, in the hecticness of life. You can still find rest in it, because he did. So if he's our model example, then we follow that we can rest in our craziness. So with the busyness of life, and life gets busy, it gets so busy, especially nowadays.
Yes.
I know we're all kind of dealing still with the pandemic. And I think the one thing the pandemic at the beginning was teaching people was like, slow down.
Oh, for sure, right? Like you said, slow down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have to do everything and be everywhere and overlog our schedule. And unfortunately, some people aren't going to learn that lesson. So when things are opening up, they're going to go right back into that.
Right.
But it's slow down, and there's so many distractions. Then we put ourselves like, so one thing for me, understanding rest in the proper way isn't always sitting down and watching TV,
Right.
because that's just a distraction, or getting on my phone, because that's just another distraction. So for me, dealing, I think we talked about it before we got on together recording, that I deal with the social anxieties a lot, like really bad. If I'm around people I don't know, I'm just gonna and freak out. But I've learned to act normal in those situations, where people could come up to me and I can seem like a normal human being and have a conversation. But what I've learned is that after these moments of being in big gatherings, I need to take small moments of rest. And it's like, just lay down, clear the mind, don't do anything. So last Sunday, um, or last weekend, me and my wife I just overloaded our schedule just beyond the point of where it was super busy. So Saturday, we went to a family baby shower, and I was around a lot of people. And even though it's my wife's family and it's the people I love, it still kind of gets me. And then after that, I had to go to well, not had to, I was invited by a friend here from our church to go watch the UFC fights, but there's going to be people there I didn't know.
Okay.
So it was basically leave that where I'm all like, oh, and then go straight to that. And I'm like, oh, so, but I still got to not perform, but just be a human, interact with people. And I did it well. I was super proud of myself. And I went home, and it was about midnight when the kids had settled down and went to bed, and it was just me and my wife on the couch. And I just kind of laid there, and in this situation, I just put on a movie, and it was just like, okay, I needed that. But really what happened then the next day for church, we had this big celebration thing. I woke up a little bit later. I slept through my alarm. So I showed up a little bit later than I should have, because I was greeting, but I just took that extra 15 minutes of sleep in the morning to rest myself completely. And then I did that, and then we served hot dogs to everybody, or corn dogs and some nachos, because we were having a party in the patio. So again, it's interacting with people. And then from there, I was recording a podcast from our show. We were doing an episode with a friend, and I was burnt again. I was like, I was feeling it. I'm not going to be on the top of my A game. I'm not going to be Chris A game, Chris. So I laid down for 15 minutes. We came in, we recorded the podcast, and then I go home and we scheduled dinner with friends. And we drove out there. So I went outside. When I got home, I unpacked everything, and I was like, how much time do we have before we have to leave? My wife says, we got 15 minutes. All right. I went outside in our hammock, and I just laid there. I let the sun hit me. I just swung back and forth. She comes out and gets me in 15 minutes. I get my shoes on, and then I'm good to go again. But I've learned, rest, stop, settle down, don't get overwhelmed. Charles Spurgeon says this: rest time is not waste time. It is economy to gather on occasional furlough. In the long run, we shall do more by sometimes doing less.
Isn't that true?
Right. And then Watchman Nee said this. He said, our rest lies in looking to the Lord and not ourselves. And in all those moments where I just kind of laid extra and did everything, it wasn't where I was just like a zombie. I was actually praying or just meditating on something. Sometimes it's just hearing a song that's been in my head. Like lately it's been Come Thy Fount, and I just kind of sing that in my head. I'm not singing it out loud, but it's just in my head. But it's just that rest time. And then the other thing, so another tip I could give, so rest, and I talked on that a lot because it's very important. I think it's the key ingredient to not hitting burnout. But the second one is just as big, but it's simple, is tell someone.
Okay.
Tell someone, be accountable. Like, hey, I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm a little burnt out. This is a little bit too much for me. I don't know what to do. Because that's what God designed us for, is for that. I didn't. I just went on and I kept going on. I didn't even tell my wife. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my brother. I just journeyed on this and allowed myself to get burnt out. But now, today, I tell my wife, hey, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by things, or this might be too much. I told my pastor, who's said, hey, let's you want to start doing this in ministry. And I've told him, like, okay, if I do that, I'm going to overwork myself. So I've got to take away from other things. And that's another key thing is learning to say no is okay. I think the church gets so caught up in, like, we've got to say yes to everything as Christians because we're doing our service to the Lord. But then remember, that then becomes performance.
Yes.
So just learn to say no. It's okay.
That was
it's okay. You don't.
For me in the beginning too, learning to say no. But then after I had like early signs of burnout, the emotional exhaustion part, as a single parent, when I was having to take care of, two teenagers by myself and, trying to take care of myself after trauma, trying to take care of them and support them in their trauma. And I didn't realize like how much that affects your body. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was like on 3 different occasions, 3 to 4 different occasions at the most, I started feeling the emotional exhaustion and like inside of my spirit feeling a certain way. And I was like, something's going on. This is not me. And each of those times, I literally like, it was like this whole spiritual thing for like 3 days, filling up my soul with the word of God, music, preaching, all of it, eating, relaxing, and just filling myself up for like 3 days. When I got like that with the emotional exhaustion part, and it wasn't extreme, but it was enough where I said, I need to take a time out, and it happened, like I said, a good 3 to 4 times during that time because I was the only one doing everything. But yeah, you'd be surprised. It just kind of, sometimes it'll just sneak up on you. You'll see little signs, and other times it just will come out of nowhere because
Right.
we think that we can, it's almost like, and in a sense, it's like when I thought about it, kind of dissected it, I'm like, in a sense, it's kind of prideful within itself because it's like we become like we're God, like we have no limitations. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because while you're talking, I was thinking about it. Like another example Jesus gives us is that so Jesus did all these miracles at the beginning of his ministry, and I think you can find it in Mark. He does at the first few chapters. He does like these miracles where he's healing a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the morning time, the people come looking for him, and the disciples are like, "Oh, he's over there praying." And Jesus woke up early to pray. And then when the people are like, "Well, do some more miracles," he was like, "No, I'm not going to do any because that's not why I came. I came here to teach."
Right.
So in that, Jesus shows us 2 great examples of making sure not so much the idea of staying in your lane, but remembering what God has called us to do. And the first thing was he prayed. So after a big moment, he went to the Father and prayed. And then when the people came in this moment where his ministry probably could have started booming if he started relying on himself and started just miracle after miracle, right? He could have had this big old following.
Oh yeah.
He said no. And he said no to these people who I'm sure have brought all their sorrow and woundedness and people who were sick. And he said, no, I'm not here to do that. I'm here to teach. And the side part to that for anyone listening, and this has nothing to do with the burnout topic, but I just love it, is that if he's here to teach, we're here to listen, and that's our job. But he's just I know what my father's called me to do, and I'm going to be about my father's business. And I think that's important for us to remember that, and that allows us to say no to certain things that just they'll overrun our schedule. And the
Yes.
the devil's fine with that. The devil is fine with us being distracted and busy, because if we're distracted and over busy ourselves, then we're not on task for the kingdom. And we can talk about like personal callings where like, yeah, right now today I feel like I'm called to do this, to do my podcast and all that. Like I'm sure you are. That's a personal one. But when we look at the Christian life as whole, our calling is to love God, love others. And if we do those 2 things, then we're doing what God's designed us to do. So if we love God, we're being obedient in our worship. And because of that, that allows us then to overflow with that love and love other people around us, which then allows them to see who God really is. And hopefully those people in our lives that don't know Christ can see Christ in us and then want that relationship with him. And then we bring them into the family and the fold. So that's our main job. And I think we lose sight of that. And then we get into the church, and it's all about programs and ministries and what can I do and how am I serving, that we get caught up in the service so much that we lost sight of what the calling is. So I think it's important to know your body, because like you were saying, your body was speaking to you, and learn to say no. It's okay. Because the one thing I've learned because I've been doing it a lot lately. I've been like, no, I'm not doing that. Way
Mhm.
more than I usually would have. But the one thing I learned is that here in the ministry we have at our church, I said no to something, but me saying no allowed someone else to step up and fill that role better than I would have.
Ah, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So
Yes.
us saying no
Mm-hmm.
allows someone else to rise up and fill the role God had called them to live. So
Yes.
if I'm going to give out tips, those would be the ones. It's rest, tell someone, and learn to say no because it's okay.
Mhm. And I've heard a person say, a couple people say rather, what we say when we say yes to something, that means we're saying no to something else. And when we say no to something, it's so that we can say yes to something else, something that might be more important, like doing something with our family or whatever. You know, but yeah, sometimes it can be hard to come
Hmm.
out of that. Because then we can end up getting into people pleasing because we're worried about, okay, if I don't say yes, then what is this person going to think about me? We can end up easily back into performing
Hmm.
people pleasing again, if we don't have those limitations. So what would you say?
And
Go ahead.
yeah, before we go on to the next one, and it's so important because you brought up family, and the one thing that you see so much from churches
Mhm.
is children now, children of pastors serving who are stepping away, or people who've grown up in the church who are stepping away because what some have done is they've put the ministry before their family,
Mhm.
and that's such a harmful thing. And it's one thing that, after almost losing my family, I would never in my life do that again. My
Yeah.
family is number one because I look at it this way. When we got the Great Commission, he said, go out to all the world, starting in Jerusalem, then
Mhm.
Judea, and then Jerusalem isn't my city I live in.
Right.
Jerusalem is my home,
Right.
and that's my family. And I've got to make sure they're number one because God's blessed me with them.
Hmm.
And as much as I want to say my family, they're his family to be steward, for me to be as the husband and father, a steward over. And so for my wife, I try to love her like Christ loves the church. And for my children, I try to raise them not in the sense of strictness and rules, but to
Hmm.
move them to be imitators of Christ. So I've try to switch some words in my parenting. I don't
Okay.
discipline, I disciple. I
Got you.
disciple my children to be more like Jesus. When I discipline, I'm just teaching them that our Father, when we do something wrong, will punish us for it. And then once the punishment is done, I could go back to doing what I was doing. But when I disciple them, I explain to them why it was wrong, why it will be harmful to them. And in discipleship, yes, there is sometimes suffering for our bad decisions,
Hmm.
but we know now that that was suffering not because of a punishment, but it was because of a choice that I made.
Got you. Okay, I see what you're saying. So how do you say, when it comes to, which we talked a little bit about this, if you want to say more on it, you can, with burnout, it preventing our relationships from flourishing. Do you want to say anything else on that part?
Yeah, I think really the important part of that, and so I'll kind of tie that all up, is that
Mhm.
uh, what burnout does really is it prevents those relationships from going any deeper, because on the road to burnout is doing and doing and doing that. For me, I'm a task oriented person. I
Okay.
am, if I'm in a car, I want to drive from A to B and I don't care what's around me. I'm not a sightseer. I'm not looking out the window. But my wife, when we drive in a car, she's like, ooh, look at the sunset. And I'm like, no, look at the road. You're going to kill us all. Please look at the road. But she loves the beauty of nature. She loves looking at those things. And it explains a lot about both of us, that me as as that person, that I just want to get the task done. I don't care about the people who are involved. She she'll get the task done, but she wants to socialize and do everything. So when burnout starts happening, I believe we kind of get caught up in that we're just so focused on getting things done or moving on to the next thing that we don't spend time with people. And really burnout even kind of tends to lead us into a shame and guilt side effect, that
Mm.
where we don't want to talk to people. We don't want to be around people because I just want to sit in my whatever this is. And that was me. During
Mm.
a long part of it, it was just sitting in my own sulky mess of hypocrisy and lies and
Mhm.
anger and frustration, that I didn't want to be around people because I was just embarrassed. I was
Yeah.
embarrassed of what I'd become.
Okay.
Um, so they don't allow those relationships to grow, and it's not until we start doing something. So a friend of mine said this, and it's been the most beautiful thing I've heard: if hypocrisy at its root is a lie, then authenticity at its root is the truth. And
Mhm.
as we as Christians, as we start becoming authentic and saying, I don't, like when I go back to that point of like, tell someone I don't got it all together, I don't have
Mhm.
all the answers, I'm in a mess. So for me, when I can tell people I have social anxiety, it's such a relieving thing that it's actually helped my
Mhm.
social anxiety. It's helped the people around know that when I'm kind of quiet, when I'm kind of just giving short answers, it's not me being a jerk or being rude. It's me just kind of dealing with that. And so they're more forgiving of it. But
Mhm.
instead, when I hold on to all these things that I deal with on my own,
Mhm.
and then I go out to build relationships, but I'm holding on to all these things and I'm kind of acting out in them, then people, those relationships die, or they get injured, or they get weak.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's not, those relationships won't flourish because uh, we're we're not really investing in them like we should, in the back and forth, the iron sharpening iron situation, where what's cling, and we're getting stronger together.
Right.
But we're more in the like shame hideful thing, and they'll never grow.
Mhm.
If I wasn't open and honest with my wife, or if we just didn't communicate, then my relationship would not flourish. But because we do, that's why it flourishes. And it's the same goes with God. We could do the same thing. We could run and hide from him. It's what Adam and Eve did. God's like, where are you? And they're like, we hid because we knew we
Right.
did something wrong.
We knew we did
Um,
something wrong.
and
Mhm.
we do the same thing with God. when we
Do.
when we're when we're in that burnout situation, we run because it
Mhm.
is that shame. And the enemy, he grabs that shame so strong,
Oh
and
yeah.
he likes to keep us down with that. So uh that's how I see how it prevents relationships from flourishing.
Mhm.
But to make those relationships flourish, it's authenticity. Authenticity is the
Okay.
key to it all.
Authenticity. I love it. Yes. Because we can be kind of, I like to call it, you know how you have the real vulnerability, then I like to call the other one surface vulnerability, where you kind of just telling people only what you think they want to hear that makes you look
Hmm.
good. You know what I'm saying? But you're not getting out of your comfort zone on surface vulnerability because you just stand on the surface. You know what I mean?
Hmm. It's a Christianese 101. You learn it as soon as you step into the
You
church,
do.
which is sad. People
Mm-hmm.
will ask you, uh, how are things going? And you're like, God is good. And then people normally
Praise
respond, all the time, you know,
the Lord.
and it's such it's a mask that we put on.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it could be, how's it going? Oh, it's been a week, but God got me through it. See, that's
Right.
more authentic.
Mm-hmm.
uh I've had some ups and downs, but I'm not going to complain because God is still good.
Mm-hmm.
Authenticity, that's letting people know that the church is a place where you can bring your hurts, sorrows, and pain, and it's totally okay. No one's going to judge you for it. No one's
Right.
going to look down. And that was the problem for myself as being an associate pastor, the lead pastor at our church. I couldn't tell people I was struggling with it because I felt like I should have been the guy who had it together.
Mm.
And I couldn't expose that, because if I did, then it was like, well, why do you have that problem? I feel like with the church, there's this analogy nowadays that people say the church is a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that analogy for us is that as we grow in the church, a lot of us assume we're either doctors or nurses or specialists at the
Mm-hmm.
hospital.
True.
And so the doctor can't have any issues. And we do that to pastors because we look at our pastors as the doctors. He can't have any issues because he's the guy performing surgery on all of us or diagnosing us. But the reality is we're all patients. There's only one physician, and he's the great physician.
Amen.
And so we're all patients. And I think if we allow ourselves, so on the flip side of it is, hey, if we see a brother or sister who's broken, how can we help them? Allow them to be vulnerable without judgment. Allow them to say what they're going through without being like, oh man, and here I thought you were so-and-so.
Right.
When we put those assumptions on people, we hurt them so much. And for myself, that was a thing that I had to get through. And that was a thing where now it's like, hey, if you think I got it all together just because I could preach on a Sunday or do a podcast or talk or teach or whatever, you're totally mistaken. I'm going to go the route of Paul, where Paul was like, hey, I'm an apostle, I'm a saint. No, I'm the chief sinner. Like I'm going to go that route. Like I know who I am and I'm okay with it because my God knows who I am. He always knows my intentions in my heart. And if I don't expose myself, I can't fix these issues.
True. Yeah, we can't fix it. You're right. And if we're judgmental and condemning others, they won't feel like they can actually have the real vulnerability / authenticity that's needed in order to connect,
And there's two things that the church gets nailed for. If you do a survey of people who don't attend church, it's one is they're hypocrites. And then two is they're judgmental. And we can eliminate both of those by saying, yes, we are hypocrites because we're all just trying to be more like Christ on a daily basis. So we are going to fail. And two is being like, no, when we say come as you are, we mean it. Come as you are. And then it's not my job to distinguish who's growing at a pace that's accurate.
Right.
Everyone grows at their own pace. I garden a lot. And we've planted plants in the same planting box. They've got the same sun. They have the same soil. They get the same watering. And we've had one of these three plants, one just flourished and it was already producing tomatoes. Another one was doing pretty good, but it wasn't producing tomatoes yet, but it had flowers. And then one was it just wasn't really growing from what we could see. But as the months went on, the other one started growing and producing fruit, but that one in the middle, it then started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and producing flowers. And then eventually when the season was really going, tomatoes, and they were all producing great fruit. And that's our growth life as Christians. We all grow at separate rates. Just because one person just flourished in it and the other one seems to be doing good doesn't mean that one that doesn't look like it's growing isn't growing. Because we may not see this upward growth, but we don't know what those roots are doing. And those roots can be going deep. And I think for us, that's probably more important as Christians, is not to have the upward growth, but that downward growth that's deep. So that way, when things come and attack us as we're growing, our roots are strong in our Savior.
There you go. Yeah, we already like down in there, anchored to him. That makes sense. But why do you think people stay in unhealthy relationships so long?
I think that just goes to there's a comfort, and then there's also just this is what I know. So we get comfortable in it, or not so much comfort, but it's easier to be this way. It's easier to stay this way, and it's easier to move in this direction. When I think about my own, and not so much a relationship with someone else, but I think about my unhealthy relationship that I had with God, I just kind of moved in it because it was this is what it is. And it wasn't until I decided that relationship was unhealthy. And that's another thing. We may not think it's unhealthy because it's just what it is. It is what it is.
Right.
And it's not until that gets exposed as unhealthy that we like, oh, I've got to change this, or it's going to get worse, or I've just got to change this. So I think that's a lot of times is that people either they don't know it's unhealthy or they just it's what they're used to, and it just seems simpler. Sometimes doing nothing seems easier than growing. Sometimes staying in the bad seems easier than trying to move out to the good, because moving out takes work.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people don't want to put in the work to make a relationship healthy. So if I want to use me and my wife's as an example, because our relationship was unhealthy, um, how we fixed that was work, and it was communication, and it was talking. And when we got done with the arguing, and we actually started talking and communicating, that's when it started getting better. Now, here we are almost 5 years later from that. And um, there are still things that get triggered from both of us that take us back to those bad moments. But we've now put in the work to communicate on those things, to talk about those things, to at times when it's overwhelming for both of us, to pray together about those things, um, and to do talk about the Bible together, and what we learned throughout the day. You know, that's the work it takes in to communicate, to say, oh, that action you just did reminded me of that. But then the work, like my wife would do that, you know, you said this and it just put me right back there. So then my work is to make sure I'm not prideful enough to say, well, that's your problem, get over it. But to say, how can I work on not doing that to you again? And now, you know, our marriage is the best it's ever been. It's so Christ-centered, but it was work. And I think some people would just rather not do the work because, yeah, it was hard. And that was for us, to be completely honest, for us, that was a point where we were at was, are we going to put in the work, or are we just going to go our separate ways? And for me, my wife is an amazing woman who prayed so diligently and hard for me during all this time of what I was going through. And for myself, um, God just, you know, I wasn't really friends with God at that time, but I still knew he was God, right? So there were a few things that he kept reminding me of. And one of them was love the wife of your youth and stay with her. And that was enough for me to say, all right, if this is what you want, God, I'm going to put in the work. And so that was both of us making that decision. And we, you know, like I said, it's been a wonderful marriage since that.
Wow. Wow, that's some good stuff. Well, how would you define the word resilience?
Resilient it's tricky, because when I think of resilient, a lot of us think of like durable and like we can go through anything and everything without being torn down. But as a Christian, resilience to me, and this is one thing I'm learning a lot of, that there are ways that we define things from a humanistic standpoint because it's defined by the world, that we then integrate into how it's defined in the Bible. So my resiliency isn't so much in me being able to go through things, but it's relying on God. So if I want to define resilience in my life, it's not my durability, it's my dependence on God. It's me being able to rely on him to get me through the storm, to help me through the times where I'm weak. I love I can't remember if it's the soldier or the general or whatever in the Bible, the story where the father comes to Jesus and he says, heal my daughter. And he says, she's healed. And he's like, okay, but if you believe, she will be healed. And he says, I believe, but help me in my unbelief.
Man.
And it's such a reminder to us that there are going to be times where we can be like, God, I believe. Oh, but I know I'm going to doubt. So I need you there to be with me, to help me in that doubt. And that again is resilience. Now, it's not what the world says. The world says a resilient person is someone who can overcome everything on their own and do things on their own and bounce back on their own. But from the Christian standpoint, I'm going to look at it and say resilience is the ability to rely on God and not yourself. It's to depend on him, that he will help you through, and he will help lift you up when you fall, and carry you when you need to be carried to get you to the next day of whatever you're going through. And that to me is true resilience.
I love that. Love that. Now, would you say that going through burnout or any of the traumas, your life traumas you've gone through, would you consider them as opportunities? Like, did you find some of it as an opportunity?
Not during it, right? So we
Right.
never look at things while we're going through it as opportunities, but
No.
because they're always just, it's always just pain, and we're so
Yes.
engulfed in
Oh
pain
my
that
word,
sometimes
yes.
it's hard to see the
Mhm.
light of everything. But when I look back at everything, so the course of everything is a failure in ministry, a failure in marriage, a failure as a person who had a relationship with God, so a hypocrite.
Mhm.
And then my cousin passed away, who's younger than me. He was like a little brother to me, passed away of
Mhm.
cancer. Um, what all of that eventually did was it opened up um, me to want to especially when my cousin passed away. Really what that did was trigger the, he was such a man of God. If he's not here, someone needs to step into that role, and
Mhm.
I need to get my I guess what really was, if my cousin wasn't around, or his last words, because he was in a medically induced coma when he passed away, so I didn't get to talk to him or say the last words with him in the hospital.
Mhm.
But what I felt was that if he were to tell me anything, and again, sorry if this is a little blunt, but it would be, get your crap together.
Mhm.
And I kind of used that to, like, okay, I've got to get my relationship with God better.
Mhm.
So first I've got to love God again. I've got
Right.
to learn to love God again. I've got to learn to love my wife and my family again. I've got to then learn to love the call again. And
Mhm.
then I've got to learn to love people again. And so all these things had to happen. And as I'm moving through all these things, then God starts working on me,
Mhm.
and he starts breaking me down, and he starts shedding me of the mask I would wear, that I wouldn't tell people what I was struggling through. And
Right.
he started stripping away all those things, and then it led to opportunities. Because the one thing I felt was, I had forfeited myself, and I
Mm.
would never be used again.
Wow.
And that was what I was struggling with. And like I said, the pastor here at the church just helped mend those
Mhm.
things. And he was like, let's start do this. And it led to me leading a small group here at the church. And then in my small group, it was like, mask off, I'm going to tell you guys I struggle with things, which
Mhm.
then led to opportunities of speaking again. I remember in the midst of the ministry failure and burnout,
Mhm.
I remember preaching the last message at the church I was doing with my brother, and in my head, as I'm up there proclaiming God's word, inside telling myself, I will never do this again.
Wow.
I will never do it again. And then to get that opportunity to preach again, and almost a few years later after that, being able to preach in front of the whole congregation at the church, and then do the podcast. And now, like I said earlier, I'm a deacon here at the church. That God
Mhm.
has, my fear of just, I don't think he'll ever use me again. Um, he's now used me in so many more opportunities, but I had to go through all those things.
Mhm.
I had to go through that journey. And it's that question, if you could change your past, would you? And I look at it and I say, no, I had to do that, because that, all that had to destroy Chris. It had to wipe out Chris so that I can walk in Christ, and I
Mhm.
can be his reflection here on this earth, and that I could do that, because um I would never trade any of it back
Gotcha.
for who I
Because
am today,
yeah.
and what God has allowed me to do. And most importantly, the new relationship I developed with him. I would go through all of that again to just have that opportunity to know my God in a right way and
Mhm.
love him in that way, instead of, like I said earlier, worshiping a false God. So we may not see things our traumas as opportunities. We may see them as just pain, but God uses our pain. And sometimes it's not even meant for me. Sometimes my pain is meant for someone else. It's meant to help guide someone else. And that's an opportunity to then bring someone into the fold and into the family of the Lord. That's an opportunity to be, we call it our testimony.
Yes.
Use our testimony to change someone's course and direction in life and bring them to Christ. And so if everything I went through was just to help one person and get them to have a right relationship with Christ so that they can have eternity with our Savior, just like I did, I do, then yes, I would go through it all again. And that's the real opportunities. You know, we can look at opportunities. And again, it's using these words in biblical perspectives and not worldly ones. Opportunities always don't equate to success or new ventures. Right. Opportunities as Christians are opportunities to proclaim the gospel.
Yeah, spiritual maturity as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but then, like you said, they don't all. You know, a lot of times you think opportunity the world's way equals wealth, but that's not necessarily true. Not necessarily true at all. So would you, do you mind telling the audience about your podcast and what you think it takes to become a good podcaster?
So I'll answer the first one, but the second one, I don't know if I could answer that yet. My podcast, or the podcast I co-host on, is called Your Church Friends. And we have our own website. It's yourchurchfriends.rocks. That's ROCKS. And we just added the catchy little phrase because we rocks as a joke, but it's Your Church Friends. And really what we do on there is biblical literacy and conversation about the Bible is the most important thing to us. I feel that through conversations, I've learned more about the Bible than sometimes reading a commentary or studying or listening to a pastor. Because through conversations, we discover new things as someone else shares something and as I share something. And really with our show, my co-host Murdoch, we try to just talk about the Bible in a way that, like, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Do you understand it? And it's real, it's genuine. And so our first season, we did 28 episodes on the Sermon on the Mount, and I loved it. We lived in the Sermon on the Mount for 28 weeks, and it really taught me that Jesus came here and he said, hey, it's my kingdom come or nothing, and you need to live as my kingdom here on earth. And it's such a beautiful, it's 2 chapters, but it is, for me, it is the guideline of how I should be living as a Christian, and especially as we rolled into 2020, right? You're talking about like the craziness, and in the midst of it, it's like people hating each other. And you look at that as a Christian, what do I do on this? Right. Well, Jesus says, love your enemies. And I'm like, okay, how do I love my enemies? Pray for them. What? You know, and it's beautiful. So I really enjoyed it. Our new season just came out. We're 3 weeks into it.
Okay.
And it's more of kind of like this conversation where we're taking topical discussions and we're doing those. So we've talked about what is worship, signs and visions and dreams. How does God talk to us? Our wives came on the show and we were doing Christian catchphrases, which that one was fun. That was probably one of my favorite episodes to sit there and talk with my wife and have her on the show. And then so that's what we do, and that's what it's about. But what makes a good podcaster? I'm going to go back to a previous answer for what I said earlier: authenticity.
Right.
Be authentic. Be you. Be. I'm successful because I'm doing what God's called me to do.
Right. Wow. And I know what you mean. Like you said, that's the most important thing. If that's what He's called us to do, and we're doing it, He's getting the glory, then it's a successful podcast, right? So name some fun
exactly.
things. Yes. That the listeners would want to know about you.
So for myself, some fun things. I garden a lot. I have 2 children. My daughter is my world and my son is my heart. And that's what I tell them on a almost weekly basis. I remind them of that. I garden. I have chickens. I love my chickens.
Oh, wow. Yeah, chickens, huh?
Yes. It's not something that my wife does. It's me. She helps out, but they are they are my girls, and I use this term. I am the head hen. So they know who the head hen is in there. But I love it. They're so much easier than taking care of dogs or cats or any other pet. They give you something every day. Like, what other pet gives you breakfast?
True.
And they're a lot like me. You know, they like being around things, but they also don't want to be around people. You know, they'll run away from people and go into their thing. But if you got food, again, a lot like me, if you got food, they'll be your BFF. But if you don't got food, they're gonna go somewhere else. So yeah, I love my chickens. They are my girls. It's actually the next tattoo I'm gonna get is I'm gonna get a chicken wearing a luchador mask, because I also love wrestling, holding a championship belt, and it's gonna encapture those two things that I really enjoy. But yeah, I'm if the fun thing about me is I'm a crazy chicken owner.
Crazy chicken. What is let's see, one book that you're reading now?
So one book I'm reading right now is I'm actually, the books I'm reading, the first one is To Live is Christ and to Die is Gain by Matt Chandler. And I've really been enjoying that book. We actually on our podcast started as YouTube, and I was doing a weekly thing going through the book of Philippians, and I think, gosh, I tore that thing up verse by verse.
Wow.
So we did almost like, what was it, like 30 something episodes, 5 minutes talking about Philippians, and the book is basically about Philippians, and Matt Chandler breaks down the book, and it's been just it's a good read. There's moments in there where it talks about what Christian joy is that really hit home for me.
Okay.
And then the other one is Philip Keller, and it's A Shepherd's Look at Psalms 23. So Philip Keller was a shepherd in South Africa, and he talks about sheep there because he knows them so well, and how it all relates to Psalms 23. And he breaks it down each section. So the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want is like chapter 1. He leads me and comforts me, all of it is chapter 2. And he breaks it down from the shepherd's perspective of how this all really means, and how our relationship as a sheep to our shepherd makes sense. And it's just a great book. It really is. And it's a small read, so it's not a lot, but those are the two that I'm into right now that I'm really digging. The other one is a lead by Paul David Tripp, but that's more of a, I like Paul David Tripp, but that was more of a, hey, you're a deacon, we're going through this, read it. So it wasn't like a my pick and type read like that, but it's a good book. The other two I'm really
Lead is the name of it?
Yeah, Lead.
Okay. Okay, Paul David Tripp. Yeah, I've heard of his name before. Seems like I've read a book by him, but I cannot remember what, but I know I have. Yeah. I know I have, because of the three different names. You know how certain names you remember? And it's probably been a good 6 years, but I've read a book by him before.
Yeah, I know him more by so if you go like on social media and you like look for him, I always remember he's the dude with the mustache. He's got like a nice curled mustache.
Really?
Look, yeah, and you know, its beard's all gray now, and it's a really cool look. So that's how I remember him. When they gave me the book, they're like, it's by Tripp, and I was like, oh, the dude with the mustache, and they're like, yes.
Wow. So what do you do to fill up your soul?
For me, it's music.
Music.
I love listening to music. I feel like one thing that's helped me, another thing that I deal with is depression. And one of the things that's helped me is someone told me, when depression is screaming at you, turn up your worship. And that actually does help fill up my soul so much. You just put on some good worship music, and it refocuses my eyes back to God. Where depression brings you inward and keeps you there, turning on worship brings you back outward, and it helps actually so much. So to fill up my soul, it's worship music, and it will literally change my attitude in a day.
Yeah, the worship music is powerful. And I was listening to some this morning, and I said, oh my goodness. I was listening to CeCe Winans. And oh my goodness, what is the name of that one song? Jesus, You're Beautiful to Me. and the words of it are just, I don't know, I just found like they're so powerful, you know? Like she
Hmm.
says, sweeter than springtime, purer than sunshine. So to think about that, you know?
Yeah, there was a song. It's called "I Don't Want to Go," and it's by Chris Renza Mania or something like that. It starts with an R, then it goes easy and it turns into a bunch of other letters. But for me, what really impacted me, it was about. It started off about David, and David built the temple, and he wanted to do that for God, but God told him, you know, the story is like God told him, no, it's not for you, but your son would do it. But the lyrics are, you know, just because I'm paraphrasing and paraphrasing it wrong, but the big takeaway is, he said, you know, this isn't for you, but it doesn't mean I love you less.
Mm,
And that was a song, actually, as I was kind of recuperating,
mhm,
refining my relationship with God, that I needed.
mm,
And there are times I go back to it, because to fill up my soul, I need to be reminded that, like, you know,
mhm.
just because, and it breaks down Moses, David, and the children of Israel, like these big moments where you think like, God isn't with us, that
Mhm.
God is there and he's giving us other directions. And it's really talking about, I don't want to go if, like, unless you're going to take me there. And
Mhm.
it ends with Jesus and Peter, and it's just a beautiful written song. But it, you know, like Moses didn't get into the promised land, but that didn't change how God loved him. And
Yes.
at least alive, he didn't get into the promised land.
Mhm.
When you look at the transfiguration, when Moses was there, he got
Right.
into that promised land. So God
Sure
delivered,
did, didn't.
but as a flesh and bone, he didn't. And like David, you know, he wanted to build that temple, and just because God told him no to that didn't mean that God loved him less. And and
Yes.
and that, when I was talking about never being used again,
Mhm.
that was the song that helped me understand that, you know what, God may not be done with me yet, but I have to change my perspective from being ready to just willing.
Yes. Mhm. Yes, that is so true. Okay, name one television show that you recently got hooked on.
Oh, one. There was one that me. Oh, uh, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Hmm. I've not
Uh,
heard of that one.
yeah, the Avengers, Disney Plus.
That's what
That
it is. The Avengers. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a big comic book person. I've loved comic books since I was little. And that was one that me and my wife got into. Before that, we were doing a WandaVision, which again, same comic books. And that was me and the kids and my wife, we would be our Friday night watch together thing.
Mhm.
And the Mandalorian was all a part of that. And we were the Captain or the Winter Soldier, or the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That one had me hooked. I was definitely hooked into that, to where, because they're not, it's not like Netflix where they're like, here's all the show, right? And you could
Right.
binge it. They
Mhm.
were like, we're gonna put one out every Friday, so you're gonna keep waiting till next Friday. Like back when I was little, you know, when back in the day when we used to watch TV and there was no DVR, like you had to watch it when it came on.
That's what we have
Um,
to do.
yeah, and my kids, they don't get that. They're like, just watch all of it. And I'm like, no, you don't get that. You had to wait every week.
Every
So that was the last one. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Me and my wife had a good time watching it together.
Oh, that was sweet, especially the fact that she watched it with you.
Yeah, I've changed her a lot into some
Mhm.
things that she likes to watch. So she'll watch the superhero stuff with me. She'll watch wrestling with me.
Mhm.
And in the same vein, then I return and I'll sit there and watch Beachfront Bargain Hunters with her when she puts it on.
Oh, that's sweet. What is one thing you want people to know about you?
Oh, you know, I'm just a man who's trying to love God his best. And if people could know that about me, I feel like if we can know that about everyone, that would be the best way to look at people. Because then, you know, when you see the moments of like, oh wait, you're a Christian and you're doing that, like, yeah, I failed, I messed up, but I'm just a guy trying to love God as best as he can. And some days I nail it, some days I knock it out of the park, and some days I don't, and I miss and I strike out. But
Mhm.
if there's anything people, I want people to know about me, is that I love God. I always felt I related to David so much in my life, and I always loved the caption that David got, that he was a man after God's own heart.
Mhm.
And that never meant he was perfect. It
No.
never meant that he was without fault, because David was a murderer. He was an adulterer. There's a list of what David did, but it doesn't take away that tagline of he was a man after God's own heart. So that was something that I always, and to this day, I still treasure, that when I pass, that would be what people said about me. I'm pretty sure the first thing they'll say is he was a jerk, but then hopefully they'll say he was a man after God's own heart.
Right. I see exactly what you mean. I've got one last question for you.
All right.
If money wasn't an option, what would you do to help others?
Oh, I would say it's such a hard question, because you want to take care of people who are that are hungry, right? You want to get clothing on people. You want to help provide shelter for people. But if money wasn't an option, what would I do to help others? I would try to get God into their lives, or introduce God into them, as through whichever means that means. So if it was food and that was my way to introduce God into them, then food would be that. If it was clothing, then that would be that. If it was taking care of a bill or helping out in that way. But if money couldn't stop me, I would use whatever I could do to get God in front of people.
Wow. And in whatever way it is that he would enable you to do that.
Yes.
Wow. One last thing. How can people find your podcast?
We're everywhere. We're on Apple Podcasts, which I think is changing some of its game in the future, but we're there. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. It's on all the major ones. You could also go to our website, yourchurchfriends.rocks, and you can listen to all the episodes we have there. I think we also have a link for that Philippians YouTube stuff that we were doing. And then Podbeam is our host site. So it's on there as well. But yeah, probably our website, because our website would lead you straight to whatever you want to listen on. Like sometimes I bounce between iTunes when I listen to podcasts, from iTunes to Spotify, and it just varies on what I'm doing. Sometimes I like the way Spotify works more than iTunes. So it's just, I guess, yeah, that's the way. You could also find it on our YouTube channel. I put the audio
on the YouTube.
Our YouTube. I don't put video. I don't really like video. I had to look at my face enough when I was editing our videos when we did the Philippian stuff, and I can't look at my face anymore. So editing, I've gotten used to hearing my voice in the editing process, but looking at myself, I'm just like, no, I can't do that. So but we do have the audio, so we don't record ourselves videoly anymore. We just do audio, and I like that better.
Okay. Wow. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being a guest on the Valley of Grace podcast. This has been
Thank you.
And I hope you found this to be fun too.
I did. Thank you for having me. I'm more than willing to do this again whenever you need me to. Okay. This was great. I enjoy it. The one thing I've learned over this time is I just really like talking about God. And on our podcast, me and my co-host, outside of that, we have nothing in common, but we're like best friends because of it. And we could talk about God and the Bible all day, but we really don't have much common interest outside of that. But that's what should always unite us as believers is his word.
Isn't that the truth? Yes. I know years ago, the church that the Baptist church I went to as a kid, and the former pastor who just recently passed away a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, he would always say, as Christians, like sometimes you get caught up in denominations, but he would say, as Christians, we might have 2 or 3 things that we disagree on. Minor things, but we let those things sometimes separate us from the main thing. The main call is us loving God, and so that's common ground for anything. Once he's at the center of it, that makes a good relationship. Yes.
100%.
So much. Yes, 100%. Thank you so much, and have a good one, Chris.
You too. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
He had died. The love love that refines. So much I wish I could give back, but I'm not intact to be sharing all of that. You took the price to give me that life, and now it's never gonna fade away. When I see I need more of him, he whispers the sweetest of mercies upon my ears, and I won't go back the way it was again, 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 and now a valley of grace where things would change. I've seen the light, so valley of grace where things have changed. Oh, I've seen so much, so much.